The Soul Foundation exists to seriously address one of humanity's biggest questions: unidentified anomalous phenomena. The Soul Forum is a digital platform that extends the critical discussions and research presented at our annual symposium. Welcome to the Soul Forum with our host, Dr. Peter Skafish, cultural anthropologist and co-founder of the Soul Foundation.
Hey, Leslie, Jim, and Kirk, welcome to this conversation episode. It's great to have you guys here. I think that we need to have this conversation publicly because there is more going on in DC, both in the legislative and executive branches, I think in a way than ever before, at least publicly, with respect to this thing we call disclosure. Not sure we know what that is, and we got to talk about that today. But there's a lot of confusion about what could happen. There's a lot of hope about what could happen. And on top of that, there's a lot of opportunity if we approach it strategically and with some optimism, but also some caution. So I felt that we couldn't really get a better group of people to talk about this than probably yourselves. Leslie, you've been involved in different ways with efforts towards disclosure since the late 90s, early 2000s, including with a major Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against the federal government to obtain UAP records, and many things subsequent to that, including the 2017 story you did with Ralph Blumenthal and Helen Cooper. Jim, you've been publicly involved since 2015, 2016 with the launch of To the Stars, and you guys did really vital work ahead of that story and after it. And I think in terms of coordinating with people in the executive branch, you've done a lot too that hasn't always been visible. And Kirk, you've been, you were vital in ways people didn't understand from, I think, about 2018 forward while you were on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and you played a pretty key role in certain senators passing UAP legislation, which has been very historic, and you've continued your work from outside government. So you guys are a really distinguished group. You have done more than most on the issue, and I think, like a lot of people right now, you're looking at this both probably with some pessimism, even a little cynicism, after having seen a lot of failures with this. But on the other hand, I'm sure you're all looking at it and thinking, what's going to happen? So, let's talk about that. And maybe, Leslie, you could jump in first because you've got the long view on this.
Sure, Peter. Thank you. Yeah, I do have the long view because for me, there's like two phases of my work. There's pre-2017 and post-2017. So I spent literally 17 years on this before 2017, which is when a lot of people first became engaged with it, was because of that article. So for me, I was pretty convinced by then myself because I had done deep dives into so many cases and I'd met so many high-level witnesses and done a lot, did the lawsuit that you referenced, which is a whole topic unto itself, which involved working with John Podesta. And, I felt very, informed, and I was really digging deeply into cases in a way that I just don't do so much anymore. Now the cases are all out there on podcasts immediately. Everybody knows what happened in 2004 with the Tic Tac. But anyway, so but at the same time, Peter, there was so much taboo and so much stigma during that time that even though I became more and more educated about this and more public about it over all those years, there was still the general attitude was that these things aren't real, that they're a joke. It was very taboo to talk about them. You'd feel embarrassed if you were in a party and somebody asked you what you did. At least I felt that way. What do you report on? I mean, it was just like a different world. And so from my perspective, having lived through that for 17 years and then having lived through the post-2017 world, I feel like we've come an incredibly long way since then. I'm just amazed at how much progress we have made. I'm amazed at the engagement by government, the open hearings, the legislation, all the work that's been done since then, which is like another reality from what I was dealing with before. So for me, with that long view, I have a kind of different perspective than I think a lot of people do who just came in more recently and are just in a hurry. I feel very positive about what's happened. I feel positive about what will continue to happen. And I don't feel impatient about it. I just think it takes time. And I think we're moving in the direction towards something, the steps keep moving forward. So yeah, I mean, it's really like radical to me what's happened since 2017.
Kirk, what's your view right now? I mean, to make sure we have context, it was barely a month ago that Obama seemed to indicate with the statement that aliens are real, but I haven't seen them. That he again seemed to be indicating that there are UAP not of human origin, and that he knows that. And as I think some of us expected, that did trigger Trump to say something pretty remarkable, which was that was classified information. Obama shouldn't have said it. And then what came later was, within hours, was a statement that there would be a formal order to declassify records. So, from my perspective, the two presidents played out a certain truth about this to an unwitting world, which is that presidents in principle have authority over this and do know about it to some extent.
Well, picking up from where Leslie was going, when the UAP Disclosure Act more or less got defeated for the third time in Congress, I think there was a lot of pessimism fell on the community in terms of the immediate outlook. Some people, I think, were a little dispirited and thinking, was this going to lead to a low point and that would persist? I didn't really feel that way. I thought that there was still a lot of room for optimism, that in the main that we were still had a lot of momentum. And I think that what former President Obama and then Trump said, sort of gave a little boost to that optimism. Although I would say that I don't think that it's your colleague Ross asked, are we past the point of asking whether UAP are real? And I'm not sure we're at that kind of tipping point yet. But it certainly helps when the President of the United States says, this is I hope I get this right or mostly right. It's extremely important, complex issue. So, have a President of the United States make that kind of statement that has a lasting impact, I think. Of course, you sort of hinted that President Trump's response to Obama was, he sort of didn't like getting upstaged by Obama, and maybe in some way. Michelle and Barack Obama have a production company, and they're coming out with a movie about the Betty and Barney Hill abduction story from 1961. And, Melania Trump had a less than stellar rollout of her documentary, and in contrast to Michelle Obama's and so on. So, the dynamic with President Trump, and maybe he just didn't like this kind of media attention to a former, rival, I guess. So what motivated this, and is it something that he's going to follow through on? It remains to be seen whether this is serious or not.
Well, can you guys just comment on this thing about it being classified, what Obama said? I'm sorry to interrupt, Peter, but that's just been something that just seems so weird to me, to say that aliens are real. Everyone says that.
Yeah.
So is it classified because it's within a certain context that Obama is speaking from knowledge, or is it just the Trump not knowing what he was talking about when he said that?
If you want me to comment, I thought it was absolutely hilarious when Trump said,
Yeah.
"Say that it's classified," because I think, well, Trump has been briefed, and as Obama had been briefed on I don't know how much of the particulars they were briefed on, but they were certainly briefed on that, and I think President Trump was probably, you know, he shouldn't have said classified, but he did, and that's okay, because a lot of it is classified. I mean, I think if you're dealing with um, particularly the videos and some of the videos we have, some of the information we have that is classified. There's a lot of data around that is classified. The fact that UAPs are real isn't classified. I mean, it's everybody who's seen them can tell you that this is real. I think the evidence is overwhelming for that, and I think we've had enough people in the government basically say, "Yeah, it's real. We don't know what the hell's going on." I mean, if it's not ours and it's not Russian and it's not Chinese, who the hell does it belong to? I think we're fooling ourselves when we try to split the difference, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. No, and Obama was correct. I mean, Obama, which in the end he tried to backpedal a little bit on this and say, well, what I meant to say was, no, what he said was the first time was correct, and he knows it's correct, and so does Trump knows it's correct. So I think we're at that stage, and I'll just add, to what Kirk and Leslie had said before. I am very optimistic about all of this, and even though the UAPDA didn't pass, even for the third time, I look at that and I say, well, okay, that's, we got the message out already. The message is out there. It's the cat's out of the bag. It isn't going anywhere. It's going to remain where it is now. And I think there's going to be more and more coming out in the future, but it's going to take time because disclosure is a very, very complicated thing. And I'll stop there.
Well, okay, so it's complicated in this case because I'm going to identify two issues that I want you guys to weigh in on. One is that the intention seems to be, Trump has stated this, and it's been echoed by certain members of Congress, to have the Secretary of Defense or War, as they now call it, somehow in charge of declassifying some footage and some records. And Anna Paulina Luna has indicated that we should expect to see some stuff come out. And I think her relationship with the president is strong enough that she probably is in the know about some intentions there. But look, that seems to me to be what has happened historically since the 50s, is to always kick it to the Department of Defense, this issue, instead of to the intelligence community. So I have my questions there. The other issue is this is so ad hoc that I don't see how they would get full compliance from the relevant agencies, the CIA, the NRO, maybe the NSA. There's not really a systematic plan.
Well, on those points, Peter, I would say that a Truth Social post is one thing, but what we need is for something like this to be followed up with an executive order, and there needs to be a sort of a process, and it would need to be public, to see exactly what is being directed and how the process is supposed to work. I would also say that we've already seen, like, who was it? NASA came out publicly and said, we've already given whatever we have to the records archive at NARA, and we have nothing further. Personally, I don't believe that. I really doubt that NASA has never had any involvement in a legacy program, much less to claim that they don't have any remarkable encounters to relate. So that's an example of where I think the old pattern is already being revealed here. We've also seen administrations just take the Epstein files. We're gonna publish these, and then it doesn't really happen. And it took an act of Congress to kind of force that issue. And who knows, maybe something similar would have to be done here to sort of say, well, you said you were going to do this. We're going to hold you accountable for that. And you need strong legislation to sort of force it to happen. I mean, look, we didn't get JFK files released until there was legislation, and it even took another 30 years to get all of those records released. So this is almost bound to be a long, drawn out process, longer and more drawn out anyway.
Well, yeah, Jim, what do you think of this?
No, I agree with Kirk completely. I think his comment was sort of off the cuff, and really, if you really want to see some progress on this, if he truly meant this, yeah, you really do want to see a presidential order, and you want to see some kind of situation where, okay, we're gonna do this, that, and the other thing, and this is how we're gonna get it out. But I think what's going to end up is if somebody calls him on this, President Trump on this in the future, he'll probably ask DOD, okay, or Aero maybe, declassify some videos that normally were classified, and put those out there. And I think we might end up with something like that in the future. That wouldn't be. It would be revealing, but I don't think it would be anything close to what I would consider disclosure. I mean, I think it would just be more of what we've already seen. So I'm not real hopeful that what he said is gonna result in anything, because he does speak off the cuff, and he goes from one thing to another thing to another thing. So busy guy, right? So I don't know.
Well, Leslie, let me ask you this. You've interacted a lot frequently. I mean, and Kirk has as well, but in person recently with both Anna Paulina Luna and Eric Burleson. And I think, and Tim Burchett, and I think that Luna and Burchett have strong relationships, or at least Luna does, with the president. And her comments about this publicly suggest to me that there are some specific pieces of video footage that would be pretty revealing that they're trying to release through this, that there's something of a plan there. And you have any insight into that?
I mean, I don't have any insight into the specific video she might be talking about. I've spent more time talking to Eric Burleson than I have with her, but they all seem to be extremely positive about their access to President Trump and their ability to motivate him. They just always are very enthusiastic and positive about it. So that gives me hope, but I don't know really, what they might be up against. I mean, Burleson especially has talked about this overarching committee that's being set up, a kind of a task force that's going to be set up to oversee all of the disclosure process. So it's not just falling into Arrow or somebody else. So, they just always seem really positive about it. That's all I can say. And I'm very hopeful, but I agree with what Jim and Kirk are saying. I mean, I don't think we're going to suddenly have some kind of official pronouncement and then it's going to be disclosure. It's going to be a very gradual process. And the other thing, it's interesting when you were both talking about the Epstein files and the JFK files, for instance. I mean, these files seem to me to be way more in need of protection, or there'd be more motivation for protection for them because of the national security implications, because this involves technology that's so dangerous for our adversaries to access. And those two other issues don't involve that level of concern, right? They're more about protecting people. So when you deal with something like this, it's just another level of complexity and risk, it seems to me, which is going to mean it's going to be even more difficult to make it happen, and they have to be more careful, which we all respect, right? But there seems to be a lot more need for care and discrimination with this situation than there has been with anything else, except maybe like the atom bomb or something like that.
Well, sorry, were you going to say something, Kirk?
No. I just don't know if that makes sense to people, but yeah.
It makes a great deal of sense. I think present company thinks a lot of care needs to be taken. I'm not sure that everyone on the House Oversight Committee agrees, and I'm not saying that's bad. But I think that their view is that their role as a committee, whatever one thinks of it, is to actually push transparency. They're not a committee of jurisdiction, so they don't have the interests of the intelligence community or the Department of Defense at heart per se. And they've also adopted the somewhat, I think, anti-institutional view about secrecy, which is that it's not really their job to try to preserve it, because it's a bit of, I think that they associate that with the deep state, whatever that's believed to be. And I think the UAP community doesn't care so much about the national security implications, about the interests of different federal departments or agencies and so on. And so I think you've got some competing interests here. And I'm not super, convinced that those are going to get worked out between that committee and some people in the administration on the one hand, and then agency and department heads.
Let me comment on that for a second. And this is, I think, one of the fundamental problems with all of this. I was rereading, Peter, your article for Soul Foundation, on the problems with Congress being sort of cut out of all this, of the UAP discussion, and what that might mean. And but what I've seen in my career is that when you have problems like this, usually the courts don't want to get involved in it. And particularly something as serious, as presidential powers or executive powers, as opposed to congressional powers. What can Congress do? What can the executive power do? What does Congress have a right to do this? And does the executive power have a right to do this? I found that when you come down to these issues, people in the end just don't want to act. Right now, Congress isn't acting on this at all. They're not. I mean, they're making a point. I mean, they put up the legislation, but it wasn't. It wasn't a very strong push, and that's probably why it failed 3 times. And the executive branch isn't saying a damn thing. They just aren't. And we all sort of know where this lies, where it all sets. But I remember once we had an issue between the FBI and the CIA regarding, who had control over what space, and it got heated. It got heated for about a year and a half, and it got to the point where we were able to agree on everything, because our statutes were similar, and one wanted more control over overseas, the other one wanted some more control in during the domestic arena. And finally, when it got pushed up, to the White House, it came back, and it said, "Work it out amongst yourselves. Don't. This is something we're not gonna go." And now this was I consider, compared to UAP, a much smaller issue. So I think what's happening here is, you don't see the courts intervening in this, and you certainly don't see a strong congressional pushback going against the executive branch. And you have the executive branch just basically staying in a line. They're basically letting things be as they are. They have been for the last 80 years. I don't know. I can't explain that. Kirk, you probably have way more experience than all of us combined in this, because you've seen this up front when you're dealing with legislation and pushing things through. I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say about that.
Well, I would say, first of all, that there is a lot of energy on this issue coming from these members of the House Oversight Committee, and mostly on the Republican side. I applaud them for the energy and interest and personal work that they're putting into this. they're sort of inheriting from Senator Rubio, the energy and passion that this issue needs. At the same time, while the House Oversight Committee is a committee whose jurisdiction sort of covers everything in the federal government in principle, it is true that they are not seen as a powerful committee in the specific realm of national security. Oversight of the Department of Defense and the intelligence community and the Department of Energy's nuclear weapons complex and so on. They're not a powerhouse there. So they do face sort of jurisdictional challenges, but God bless them. They're making the most of their authority. They've convinced the leadership to create this UAP task force. I just as an aside, I hope that if the House flips in the fall, that the Democrats keep that going and don't let it die. That would be great. There are some Democratic members in the House who are also enthusiastic about this issue, but haven't quite been as quite visible and energetic as some of their Republican colleagues have been. I would say that you're right, Jim, that Congress has not reached the tipping point on this issue. I think that's just clear. If Congress gets the bit in its teeth, it can become a sort of irresistible force, But that happens, and I've said this before publicly, that happens when they kind of know that there's a real issue there that they know exists, and they know that they're not going to be wrong or get egg on their face if they really force the issue, right? And that's when you have examples like the Watergate hearings and Iran-Contra, and the hearings on the CIA's domestic surveillance and things like that. So we're not quite there. And what's keeping them? What I hear from friends and colleagues up on the Hill is that they need some more whistleblowers that have direct evidence, firsthand involvement in legacy programs. So far, certainly publicly, most of what they've heard are people who admittedly are passing on secondhand information. So we have a kind of a chicken and egg problem here. You need more hard evidence, but the hard evidence to get that, you've got to convince people to take these risks to come forward. So this is a key issue in determining how this is going to play out.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, in my recent conversation with Eric Burleson, it was really emphasized by him that it seems almost like the risks that these whistleblowers face have gotten worse. I mean, there is so much horrific retaliation and harassment that goes on. So that seems like, to me, a number one issue that has to be addressed. And I think the members of Congress feel this way. If we are going to move forward, they have to provide better legislation for whistleblower protections. Would you guys agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The other problem, but along with that, I mean, if you look, if you believe the latest, information about who actually controls this legacy program and how they control it, I mean, it's locked down extraordinarily tight, and whether or not people would actually have access to data that they would be able to take out or show, I think is up in the air. I mean, there have been programs that I was involved in that, you go into a room and you can review the data, but you can't take notes and you can't do anything else. And you can't, materials read only, and that's it. And I imagine that this is the case with UAP, that everything is read only. It's siloed. I think there is as somebody once said, obscene secrecy surrounding all this kind of stuff, which I think makes it very, very difficult, because you end up, like Kirk said, you end up with narratives, you end up secondhand information most of the time. But so far, we haven't had that first person narrative of a person who was at a sufficient level that they can speak knowledgeably about this and convincingly about this. And until we get that, I don't think you're going to see too much progress regarding the disclosure. Also, disclosure, again, we can get into the particulars about that, but I think most people, particularly in Congress, don't understand that disclosure isn't just the nuts and bolts aspect of this. There's a woo factor here that's going to play into this. There's a series of narratives that are going to come out, and the government better have control over those narratives. And if they don't have control over those narratives, other people are going to control those narratives. And God knows when it's going to happen. And that's the only thing that concerns me about disclosure. And
Yeah.
I'm sort of drifting off here, so I'll just...
No, that's a really great point, Jim. And I want to come back to what the narrative might be, what it should be, and so on. But what disclosure is. But before we come to that, I want to go back to Kirk and ask you, Kirk, what would be needed to create a situation where you have more firsthand people involved in UAP activities and programs in the intelligence community or the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, private contractors, to get more of those people into Congress, even into maybe the administration. I think that they face serious risk of retaliation, and also really the risk of loss of career and livelihood.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct, this is widely perceived. I mean, the reports that we've received are that the issue is they're going to lose their job. They're going to even if they there's fear about being prosecuted. I don't think that's the real fear, that the real factor that should be motivating people or deterring them. I think it's more that they all almost certainly, going to lose their jobs, because that just seems to be what happens, and lose their clearances, which is tantamount to losing their jobs. So, to me, something has to change in the framework for whistleblower protection, that people can have their means of livelihood sustained, that they have some kind of restitution or some kind of payments, so that they can take care of themselves and their families. And I also think that what's critical is that they avoid blasting this from the in public, everything, because there are sensitive aspects to this, almost certainly legitimately classified aspects to it, that they do it in a responsible way of disclosing to Congress in a secure setting. I think if they do that, they're not going to have legal difficulties, and if we can somehow get some compensation arrangements in place, maybe that will do the trick. I don't want to suggest, though, that we have not had any firsthand sources reporting confidentially to Congress. There have been some. So it's not that we're waiting. It's just that there's not enough of that, and it's not actionable. To Jim's point, about something tangible, documents, exact artifacts, or saying specifically go here and knock on this door like right now. There needs to be that kind of evidence presented, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
It seems to me too.
how do you offer compensation to whistleblowers? I mean, who would do that? How would that happen? I mean, this is a puzzle to me, that people can lose their jobs. They might even lose their status to file whistleblowing complaint if that happens. Certainly, I think in one case that you might be alluding to, we knew someone was very afraid of losing their job, and that limited the amount they spoke to the Senate and other folks in Congress. So, what's the measure that would be needed?
Well, I think that my own view is that there needs to be a fund and a process for establishing that someone, and to do this in confidence, and anonymously, that they find a way to convey what they have to report, and that they get a judgment as to the credibility of what they have to say. And then they essentially get assured that that if they proceed to share that information in a confidential manner with Congress, that they will be compensated for loss of their job and their livelihood. And this is not easy to set up, but they're whistleblowers in some legislation in other areas have been rewarded for a percentage of the fraud or waste or whatever that they uncover. So it's not unprecedented for whistleblowers to receive monetary awards. But this is a little bit different, I think, and I'm not an expert in how this processes like this should be established or could be established, but I think it's something that's needed.
Like I can speak to two instances that I've seen in my career where two officers were whistleblowers to a certain extent, and what I thought was really good about it was these officers were upstanding. They were doing the right thing, I think, in the end. But what happened was that Congress stepped in, and Congress basically, went to the powers that be and said, their careers are not going to suffer, and we're going to follow this, and we better see them move up the chain in the normal fashion. And they did. Both of them did, and both of them, one of them in particular, went to very high rank, and deservedly so, I might add. So I think Congress plays a significant role, and I think sometimes it's just letting a particular agency know, look, you can't do this. We're watching these people, so we want to see them move ahead. Now, I've also seen instances, particularly with David Grush. I mean, he was harassed. He was just harassed. And when you look at it, would he be trusted again within his own organization? And I think that's very, very difficult to know. I had spoken to him at one point, and I said, look, if you stay, I mean, he was a very young for his grade level, I thought. And I said, I think you have a, great career ahead of you. I said, but it's going to take a while until people retire, and it might take 5-6 years before they, you move on to your next position, there. But then again, you always have to worry, do the people upstairs look at you as someone who's going to, quote unquote, spill the beans if you come across something that you don't like, as opposed to what's right for the agency in general. So, I mean, it's complicated, but I think Congress has a lot of sway in this. I really, truly do. And when a congressman knocks on your door and basically says, hey, I'm paying attention to this, and people do take notice. They really do.
Leslie, you were going to say.
Jim, I would say that is correct, from my experience. But when whistleblowers file complaints with inspectors general,
Mm-hmm.
there is, especially in the national security arena, there is an immediate reaction by many on the Hill, and it's an understandable one, to keep from, quote, interfering in the investigation. Like, there is a certain taboo about Congress weighing in because of the fear that it will be seen as politically influencing the independence of compromising the independence of an inspector general. And so, that is a real thing. It has affected what staff is allowed to do, or not allowed to do, I should say, in engaging with the Department of Defense and the intelligence community about sensitive investigations like this.
Yeah.
And often the damage is done before the dust settles and
Yeah.
Congress can get in and say, well, okay, what happened? Like, it's already happened,
Yeah. That's a good point. It's a good point.
Yeah, it seems like it often happens early, before they even speak out, before the legislation would have to somehow take them back to the moment where they haven't done anything yet, because once the abuse has already happened, okay, it's the legislation, no matter what it does, even if it compensates them for loss of their job, it didn't protect them from the physical security that they were at risk, break-ins in their house and all kinds of horrible things that happen.
Yeah.
How do you protect them from that? It's not just about losing their jobs.
That's a good point. Absolutely.
Yeah.
They
fear for the safety of their families too. It's not just themselves.
Well, in this case, I think in your garden variety, I don't mean to insult anyone, but I'll say in the normal type of fraud, waste, and abuse cases, I certainly hope that people's physical safety is not at stake. But there are persistent and consistent reports that in this arena, on this issue, that there are such fears, very tangible fears, and I'm not going to challenge those folks' judgment on that.
Well, let's go into that a little bit. What's unique about whistleblowing in the UAP space, in the intelligence community, other parts of government versus others? Because one of the things that is perplexing about this is that there does really seem to be, in fact, something going on with respect to harassment, retaliation, illegal activity that is greater than seems to happen, even with very sensitive programs in other areas of government. And for that to be the case, that means something is going on with the legacy program, with let's say some the longstanding UAP activities and programs in the intelligence community and elsewhere that isn't flush with the rest of the government. It's not they're not operating in the same way if the penalty is higher. Does that seem correct to you guys?
Personally, I think absolutely correct. I'll give you an example. When To the Stars, TTSA first came out, we were in Seattle, and we were going to make the announcement in Seattle. And of course, Chris Mellon was there, Hal Puthoff, Tom DeLonge, Lou Elizondo. Lou was sort of the star of the show, he and Chris Mellon. And we were all lined up on the stage. But before we went onto the stage, I remember sitting down with Lou in the room, in the conference room. And I'm saying, I don't know. I said, it wouldn't surprise me at all if I see, some federal officers bust in here and throw the cuffs on us. I said, even though we didn't do anything wrong, nothing was going to be discussed. It was classified. We had that fear. And I think it was justified, because I think when you look at an UAP issue, it is so highly classified. I think you or Carl Nell, Peter, said it was like a hyper classification. It was so high, and I agree that it's sort of out of the bounds of normal classification procedures. I think it goes beyond WUSAP. And I think if you have, if you look at other government agencies involved with this, particular with the Air Force, there are particular powers that certain agencies have regarding the protection of a highly classified project that allows them to take liberties that you normally wouldn't take. And I know the CIA is prevented from doing anything like that, but sometimes the military is not. And then you got the whole problem with the Department of Energy because they use a whole different set of rules. So I think somehow or other, when this was put together, I think over the years, they sort of refined the security protocols surrounding this, and they're very strict. And I think it gives some elements of the government, rightly or wrongly, and I think wrongly in most cases, this ability to do things that they normally should not be doing, that I would consider highly illegal. But if you have a whistleblower, for instance, who basically goes to the IG and gives them the information, but doesn't go public about it, and I think this is what I really admire about David. He did it the right way. If you're going to do it, you can do it the right way, and he did it the right way. But if you're his home agency and you're looking at that and you're saying, well, does he have any classified information at home? They're not going to open up the door and say, tell us if you have any classified information. They may just go ahead and have the powers to break in. I mean, who's to say? I think it's gone that far. I really do. And I think there's just an element of this UAP that has this kind of sort of a hyper power to it that has been accepted by the powers that be.
So it may not be illegal then, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, you can argue with that. I mean, you can say legal, illegal. I mean, it all depends. I mean, does the president have the power to keep this away from Congress? Well, if you talk to executive branch attorneys, they'll say yes. If you talk to congressional attorneys, they'll say no. And I think both make some strong cases. I think the congressional case is much stronger than the executive case. And I would like to see the Congress, getting more information. But we also don't know whether Congress has been getting information. If you have a presidential memorandum or a notification, that's very highly classified. You can go to one of the Gang of Eight or two people in the Gang of Eight and basically tell them, this is what I'm going to do. This is considered the notification to Congress by the executive branch. Is that correct? I think it's playing fast and loose a little bit, but it may be legally, something that's binding, at least if the executive branch attorneys say it is so. So,
Jim, my response to that is that, sure, you can imagine that could have happened over the years, over the decades. But, we've had two majority leaders, Harry Reid and Senator Schumer. We've had the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee in Marco Rubio. These are all Gang of Eight members, and they have been the most vigorous in advancing this cause. And if they had been briefed on this, making it a legal, complying with the law, I don't think that they would have done what they've done. So I will tell you that for that reason, I think that if members of the Gang of Eight, so-called, have ever been informed, it was not a standard practice, and it was not extensive. So I think that the executive branch legacy program, assuming that it does exist, is absolutely in violation of the law and arguably of the Constitution.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I don't necessarily agree, only because I think the executive branch makes the case, on these presidential executive action documents. These are documents that the president controls. These documents, which basically say that we don't have to notify Congress over this. And once again, going back to that point, Congress has not made it, Congress has not gone to the Supreme Court and said, we can't have this. This is not going to happen. This is something that I think that's been worked out between Congress and the executive branch to a certain extent. Now, you're right. I agree with you. Maybe Rubio wasn't, maybe Schumer wasn't. He just doesn't say anything about it. I don't know. Maybe it's Mitch McConnell they spoke with as opposed to somebody else, or Nancy Pelosi. Don't know. But I do know that the president has extraordinary powers when he wants to have those extraordinary powers. He issues them, particularly if you have the CIA, which reports directly to him. Congress has oversight, but the CIA does not. Congress can't approve or disapprove what the CIA, any kind of a covert action or not dealing with anything in the U.S., but overseas. Congress can't basically say you can't do this or you can do this. Congress can only deny funding. And so the CIA can come back and say, well, we're telling you we're going to be doing this. And Congress says we don't approve. And they'll say, well, we're going to do it anyway. Well, where are you going to get the money? Well, the executive branch finds the money and off they go. So is that legal?
Well,
I don't know.
Jim,
I don't know. No one's been taken to court over this yet. So no one's pushing the issue. And that's what I find really sort of stunning, because I don't disagree with you at all, Kirk. If I'm leaning one way, I'm leaning more towards the congressional side than anything else. But what I'm not saying is this conflict, this push.
Well, the push is, if I may, Kirk, the push is needed, and I want to come to that point in a second. I want to not lose something so that people don't feel that we're just kind of talking too remotely or in abstraction. I want to not lose the point, which we kind of started with, which is something that's perplexing about what we hear about whistleblower retaliation with the legacy program, suggests that this thing is somehow way too autonomous of the parts of government that it comes out of and touches. Because something that doesn't make sense to me is how you would have, if it's true, someone like James Clapper somehow overseeing or aware of this. Let's say you've got some consummate, experienced professionals in government at the highest levels of leadership, and a couple rungs down from them, they're out there doing the sorts of things that happened to David Grush. Okay, we know these were horrific things. Most of us could tolerate one of these things, and I think he had to deal with a dozen of them. And that's been hard for me to just reconcile. Those claims are hard for me to reconcile with reality if this is really under any kind of normal chain of command. Maybe it's fragmented into a bunch of different activities. They're not really all speaking to each other. It's all part of a program, but it's, as people say, it's somehow embedded with private contractors. There's a sense of overview. The things David Grush said to me suggested that there wasn't really clear centralized leadership always. That's a scenario. I don't know what's true, but I find something doesn't add up here, and we would need Congress uniquely to find out what that is. Even an executive order about this would result in footage or records being released, but I don't think it would be the kind of fulsome review that you need to really get to the bottom of what the hell is going on exactly.
Well, whistleblower retaliation has happened over and over for decades, as we all know. And it's not coming from someone at the top ordering it. These are actions of the bureaucracy in many or most cases. And I think that it's not hard to understand this. I don't know if this is significantly different, if this case regarding UAP is significantly different from anything else. I mean, Jim Semivan is the CIA veteran. He knows that agency way better than I do, and what that bureaucracy is prepared to do to people unilaterally without express permission, without direction. The security services around the security for these programs. What are they prepared to do? Unbidden, somebody says decides it's okay to go do these things to people, and it happens over and over again. I would like to address one of Jim's points. White House lawyers, the White House counsel's office has consistently, for decades, asserted that the president has plenary authority, and plenary is in quotes, authority over the access to classified information. And that's a cardinal assertion of the president's lawyers. And plenary in the dictionary says complete, total, unfettered. Well, nowhere is that in the Constitution of the United States. It's not written down anywhere in the Constitution. It's an inferred power. Well, Congress has an awful lot of national security functions. They raise and support armies, they approve the budgets and so on and so forth. So you can also then infer strong congressional powers over classified information. And you're right, this has not been tested in courts. And if it were, I think the courts would be loath to sort of rule that one's in favor of one side or the other on things like this. It's a shared authority, a shared power, but it is certainly not a sole power of the president or the executive branch, not by any stretch of the imagination. So the question then becomes, and this is highly relevant because you've had people like Lou Elizondo and others who are everybody knows about, who say, I can't tell Congress what I know in violation of my non-disclosure agreements because I'll be prosecuted. Well, the whistleblower protection laws explicitly say that a non-disclosure agreement does not apply to Congress. Congress is an authorized recipient of classified information. Okay. So, and I furthermore think that any judge would say, if presented with a case like this, oh, we're prosecuting this individual for telling Congress what we have against the law, what we've kept from Congress. Okay. But we think that's okay. I don't think a judge would, I think a judge would throw that out of court and say, you're prosecuting someone for telling Congress something that you have against the law have kept secret from Congress? I don't think that would ever stand up in law or in a court of law, and much less the court of public opinion. I think it's an unsustainable position. So I don't know. I don't think that the government would go down that road of attempting a prosecution on that basis. I think that instead they'll find and have found other effective ways to silence people and deter them from coming forward in the first place. And that's why, things like a compensation fund is so important.
Well, I think you make a very good point. And I'm sorry, Leslie, why don't you go ahead? I don't want to.
No. I mean, you guys are the experts on this. I mean, my only thought comes back again to the physical threats and harassments and break-ins and those kinds of things, which obviously are not legitimately being ordered, I assume, by any of the agencies. I mean, who are the people that are one of the whistleblowers, Matthew Brown, talked about this recently. I don't think it was him. It might have been Dylan Borland or one of the others. Somebody broke into the house and took his grandfather's ashes, who were in an urn, and threw them and broke it on the ground. And it's not like this is just some random thief. These things happen consistently to these people. People come in their homes and they write big X's outside of their houses. They stalk their houses, threaten their families. So this is something that seems to me separate from what you guys are talking about. I mean, do you have any insights on who the people are that are doing this?
I don't, Leslie.
I don't.
Yeah.
I agree with Kirk there. I don't think this is coming from a head of an agency or anything like that. I think this
Right.
is more of a bunch of brigands who take it upon themselves to do things like this. And as long as they're not, quote unquote, killing anybody or hurting anybody, physically, that it's okay for them to do that, to harass people. I think it's awful, and we haven't caught anyone. I mean, we just haven't caught anyone.
Yeah.
I was going to, add though, given what Kirk was saying about people with clearances, and in the agency, I knew it was just drilled into you, that when you signed up, went in there, you had an NDA, and you signed the NDA, but a very large, inclusive NDA. You'll never discuss this, anything that was classified ever in your career. And if you know about something that's classified, even though you're not read into that program, you won't comment on that either, which is the reason why I don't like to make comments about, who's running this and who's running that and who's doing this. But I will say that there is a feeling among at least agency personnel, a very, very strong feeling among agency personnel that you trust the process, that if somebody is at a 50,000 foot level on a particular program, and you come in at a 10,000 foot level, and you look at it and it doesn't seem right to you, you can go to your supervisors, you can go and talk about it, and you can say, look, this is something smells about this. And the supervisor says, well, look, I'm at the 30 foot level. Let me check at the 50,000 foot level. And they come back and they say, no, it's okay. It seems this way, but it's really not this way. And I've seen that happen actually a few times. I'm not saying that's correct all the time, and that you should go by that necessarily, but it's very, very hard for somebody to say, well, look, with the limited amount of information I have, I am going to go out and I am going to, like, if I believe that Congress should know about this particular program, because I know the agency has not expressly told Congress about this program, I want that to happen. That's not going to happen very often, particularly with agency people. They're just going to look at that and they're going to say, well, we respond directly to the president. We're an executive agency, and we work for the president of the United States. Now we work for the the people of the United States, obviously. But when push comes to shove, the president is the one who basically gives you the marching orders, the president and the NSC. And any kind of dialogue between the agency and the president is sacred. And it's not, you can't knock on the door and say it's discoverable, we want to see it. Congress can't do that. So those laws have to change. And I think if otherwise you're not going to get anywhere. This is the problem I've seen throughout my career with this. Is this Congress gets told things, particularly in the oversight committees, they'll be told about the programs and stuff. But Congress also understands they don't need to know the sources and the methods. They don't need to know the name of the asset we're using. They don't need to know particularly the name of a U.S. corporation that we're using to do a particular an operation overseas. What they basically need to know is, give me the general gist, how much money you're spending, and is this worthwhile, or are we going to clap if you succeed, or we just look at this and say, this is nonsense. We don't want to have anything to do with it. And that's the purpose, I think, of oversight. But oversight only goes so far.
Well, Kirk,
yeah.
Kirk, Kirk, what do we need in terms of legislation to at least position Congress so it has some kind of formalized jurisdiction over the issue? Because what Jim is describing, no, that's not going to change about how policy and activities are carried out in the executive branch. But we still suffer from the situation where Congress doesn't know it's real. There's no clear committee of jurisdiction. It seems we have a program that was designed, people have told me this, so that there could be no effective committee of jurisdiction because the activities are spread too far around government to make there be one source of jurisdiction. I mean, what do we need legislatively?
Well, I guess I disagree that Congress is sort of powerless at this point. I think Congress and needs needs legislation to somehow to move forward, or some change in some power dynamics. I mean, if Congress gets the bit in its teeth, it can be an extremely formidable force, as we've seen many times in the history and since the Second World War. It's just a matter of arming these elected officials to where they're confident that there's a there, and that there's something really wrong happening, and we're just not quite there yet with this issue. And it is a huge issue if everything that is that many of us believe is true. If it is true, there's also powerful incentives to avoid having it disclosed. So it is fraught, and I certainly am sympathetic and understand completely when Jim talks about the view of the employees of the executive branch and answering and following their chain of command. What I am saying, so it takes great courage to go outside of those rules and those norms, but that is what is necessary. We talked about a restitution fund, maybe to compensate people for loss of their livelihood. You can also beef up accountability. Like, a lot of this stuff is hard to prove in a court of law. I mean, think about Dave Grush. When he was having trouble with PTSD, and he had interactions with his local police department over it. Well, somebody, probably, I think, at the CIA, let that out to a reporter and said, go here to this sort of precinct and ask for records about this that happened on this night. I mean, who do you sue? Who do you take to court? Who could Dave Grush have turned to get to the bottom of that and hold somebody accountable? And there's probably 100 different ways that things like that could happen, or retaliation could be executed on people that you can't prove in a court of law, or it's really hard. So, so what do you do about that? You just have to be really prepared to vigorously investigate and enforce and make it clear that you're not going to stand for those kinds of actions. And so far, we're not there. Congress is capable of doing that, but you gotta meet them halfway. Like, this is a hard to believe story, right? I mean, we've been battling this for 80 years. It's hard to get through, but I think that once you do, you'll find that Congress is up to the task.
Well, they certainly did it with the church committee, didn't they?
That's what I was trying to remember. Is I can't believe I can't remember the Church Pike Committee, but yes, that's what they did. It.
They basically stepped in and they changed everything. They just turned the agency completely around, rightfully. I mean, they were just way out of bounds on so many issues. But anyway.
Yeah,
it seems like it's a matter of
former agency. I had a wonderful career there, and I have only good things to say about it after 1975. But go ahead, Leslie.
But I was just going to say, for something like that, it just seems like it's a matter of having a large number of the members convinced about something, like you were saying, Kirk. I mean, right now we've got like these 3 members of the House Oversight Committee that are like really enthusiastic, but there just aren't enough of them to move it forward in any kind of a major way. That seems like the biggest issue is getting more and more Congress people involved and educated about it. And given everything they have on their plate to deal with in the world that we live in, this isn't going to be a priority for a lot of them. But Burleson did say, since Trump's statement, that behind the scenes, a lot of fires are being lit, not only in various agencies, but also among other members of Congress that are starting to want to come into the fold.
Yeah.
Not all of them are public yet, but it just seems like, for a major movement to happen, there have to be a lot of members that are involved, right? Or it's just it just sits there.
A lot of members or certainly a sufficient number of key members, you know.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
and
we're not quite there.
No, not yet, but we're moving in that direction.
I think
I
so
hope
too.
so.
Yeah.
and
I hope
it,
so. I
it
think
strikes
so.
it strikes me, to go back to the point about the church committee, which, for people listening who aren't familiar with that, that was the Senate's special committee that investigated the not just the CIA but the NSA before it was public, for domestic intelligence activities which were illegal, and that led to the establishment of the Senate Committee on Intelligence, and as well as some statute law which established congressional oversight over the intelligence community. Now, it seems that until we have something very parallel to that with UAP, which would require all the members you're talking about, Leslie, being fired up and feeling that there's both political opportunity and also responsibility on their part to do this. Until that happens, I think Congress's role is going to be very, very weak. It's the fact that the House Oversight Committee has some strength right now, I think, has to do with the unique relationship some members of it have with the president himself. I think without that, they'd be kind of spinning their wheels right now, but they've got some wind behind their sails due to that. But we absolutely can't count on that. Congress will probably go to the Democrats in the fall. Jared Moskowitz seems to be the one Democrat on that committee who seems very, very committed. He doesn't seem as passionate as others. He doesn't seem to understand it as well as others. Maybe I'm wrong about that. That's not a criticism of him. And meanwhile, Andre Carson is the public person on the Intelligence Committee, and he hasn't been particularly vocal and active. So it seems to me we'd have to have a real, fulsome effort to educate members, to get them right to Chuck Schumer's position that there's something unconstitutional here, or at least something illegal, but probably unconstitutional, and that Congress needs to take the reins.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen though down the road, I think based on everything that's being done so far, all the good work that's being done, pushing Congress to do this, I think they're going to probably come down to, disclosure is one issue, but I think what they're going to probably end up doing is formalizing, what I would hope they would do is formalizing the Gang of Eight to be read in on this. I think that will be a middle ground that they'll probably be able to reach. Something this highly classified, they're not going to want to go to members of Congress, all members of Congress, and sort of brief them on this. That would be disclosure. That's a separate topic. But I think if on the most highly classified portions of this, I think the most they're ever going to do is just the Gang of Eight.
Well, Jim,
I would hope that would happen anyway.
Jim, I would say the Gang of Eight is the easy handle that people grab for because it's a piffy phrase, But really, that was created for covert action, and it does not include the chairman and the ranking of the two armed services committees.
Oh, I would definitely include them.
Right, but then that's the gang of 12. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I know, but I'm just saying the Gang of Eight doesn't quite do it here. Not to mention the chair and ranking of the defense appropriations subcommittees. Of course, they're going to would have to be part of this as well. So
yeah, see, I don't think that I just don't think they're ever going to let it go that far. I think they'll have to come up to a compromise. It's sort of like when you get a certain amount of intelligence. I remember when we used to disseminate intelligence, we had a particular source that was very, very sensitive. It would go to 5 people. It would go to the president, and the vice president. They were considered one, and then it would go to the Secretary of State, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Maybe they had a DOD and nobody else, and that's very, very common. And it was a way to protect the information, and protect the source. And it wasn't the ideal thing because, the people that really needed that particular information maybe, weren't getting it or were getting it sort of diluted. But that's how secrecy works sometimes. So,
Yeah.
Well, I think where we're at in the conversation brings us back to disclosure, and the question with disclosure in the sense people imagine it, which is that that a president tells you in outline the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and it's a story about a history that was kept classified. If that's what disclosure is, then that tells us something about why Congress doesn't know about this, because it depends on what's known. It depends on what happened over the last 80 years, and it depends on what kind of knowledge exists about UAP, about their reasons for being here, about their activities, their areas of activity, about human non-human interaction. There may be some real wild facts there that would implicate the government in some activity that nobody would feel comfortable with, whether it was right for it to happen or wrong for it to happen. I mean, and so, both with respect to bringing Congress in properly, but also more importantly, to telling American citizens and residents what is going on, disclosure seems like a very steep climb to me.
Yeah, but everyone talks about ontological shock. Everyone talks about societal disruption and so on. Well, in the end, to me, it depends upon what the government knows and what the government has to tell people. If the president of the United States says yes, non-human intelligent species are visiting Earth, they have been for thousands of years, but don't worry, they're incredibly peaceful. And we have been in communication and everything is going to be fine. This is one reason why my predecessors haven't divulged this before, is because we don't see a threat to national security. I mean, that would be one thing. Okay. And I think the stock market might handle that with some aplomb, but what if the story is, actually bad news, there's 6 different species and 4 of them are extremely hostile and they want to eat you for breakfast. I mean, I think that would be a very different kind of reaction, right? So what is it that would be disclosed is key to determining, in my mind, what the reaction is going to be and what the consequences are going to be.
Well, but, Kirk, I would say I hate to put you on the spot, but to bring some levity to this, I'm going to love to put you on the spot for a second here, because I know you won't say anything you can't, but you were in a lot of classified briefings about this, where, as you told me the first time I met you, you had a lot of senior people coming in from the intelligence community telling you and a colleague on the Senate Intelligence Committee to take the issue very seriously. And I would bet that some of them said, look, we're going to lay out some facts here, and here's what they are.
Well, we heard some partial versions of reality as those people saw it, right? But one of the things that, and I'm really interested in Leslie and Jim's views about this, but we've heard and read and talked to people with all kinds of different versions of the reality here. I mean, I think we are all confident that there is a reality that needs to be to come out, right? But if you asked me, for the truth as I see it, I don't have enough information to say, right? I've only heard versions of it. The consistent thing is that there's a reality there, and it's really incredible, right? But much beyond that, I can't say. Do I suspect that there have been, for example, crimes committed in the name of security over 80 years? Yeah, I would personally bet some money on that. Um, but what about things like has the United States government sanctioned abductions, and have even U.S. government personnel been present at some of them? These are allegations that are made out there by serious people, right? Well, if that happened, okay, why did the government agree to that? Is it because they didn't have any choice because it was going to happen anyway? And so they were there to sort of monitor or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, these things are all going to matter. They're going to matter a lot, right? And it's going to be like the Church and Pike committees about, like, okay, it's all got to come out, right? But frankly,
Right.
I also think that we need to be in the frame of mind that ultimately there needs to be a truth and reconciliation process here, right? What the kind of thing that South Africa went through, and that's not the only example, but it's a good one. Is that we want people to come and tell their stories and the truth, but we shouldn't be interested in retribution for this stuff. I don't think that's the way that this is all going to get resolved in the end.
Right.
So I'm sorry if I veered from where
Oh,
you wanted me to go. But
No, I mean, I think the point in a nutshell, Kirk, it's sort of like what you're saying is no matter how tame any kind of official announcement might be, even if it's just general, yes, there is a non-human intelligence here. It's been here for, a long time, just like you said initially. The questions that will come up after that announcement, no matter how mild it is, all the questions are going to be on the
yeah,
table, and the authorities are faced with dealing with those questions.
right.
And so that it's like opening Pandora's box, no matter where you start with it. And so I just can't imagine that that's not a lot of the reason why they're, the people who oppose this are opposing it. And I can understand that perspective, honestly.
Hmm.
I mean, the kinds of questions that are going to be asked, the lawsuits that are going to be filed, and then you have to deal with, as Jim mentioned earlier, the sort of paranormal aspects of this.
Hmm.
Are abductions real? Did Eisenhower meet with the aliens back at such and such a time? All of that is opened up.
Yes.
How do you possibly deal with that? And so I kind of get it why. I mean, I think that's why we have to be extremely gradual in the process of disclosure and kind of acclimate people gradually to it. But when we cross that line, I don't know. I don't know how all of that's going to be handled, to tell you the truth. I mean, and I understand the perspective of people who think it's not a good idea.
Yeah. I think personally, I'm 100% with both of you guys on this, and maybe a little bit more on my own on this too. But because if you have to look at, I put this out to people. I think there's been 14 presidents in the last 80 years, and let's assume that some of them knew something about it. I can't imagine each president didn't have some type of information on this. But there were also, agency directors, military people that knew all about this or knew something about this, and including defense department people. Defense contractors, things along those lines. Over 80 years, that's a lot of people, and nobody said anything. Really, you get a Bush
Well,
coming out. Well, I know, and then you get
people have said things.
yeah, people have said things, but the problem, as Kirk pointed out, what the hell is, what do we know? And what is this? What does disclosure actually mean? I've been studying this for over 40 some years. And if you look at the the nuts and bolts is one thing. All right. But when you get behind the nuts and the bolts, you're looking at, contact experiences, you're looking at abductions, you're looking at the paranormal aspects of all of this. And of course, somebody is going to be asking these questions, and you're going to have 100 different narratives when the president comes out and says something, at least 100 different narratives. There isn't going to be one reporter who isn't going to be hanging on and beating the doors down on the White House to tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. If the White House stops it at limited, that's why I don't believe there's such a thing as limited disclosure. It's either disclosure or not. I think what's going to happen is someone is going to fill a void, and the people that are going to fill that void are guys like me. It's going to be right-wing pundits. It's going to be left-wing pundits. It's going to be every experiencer on the planet. It's going to be people with different agendas. It's going to be religious authorities, scientific authorities, cultural anthropologists. I mean, they're all going to have a say in this, and they're all going to say, look, I've experienced X, Y, or Z. There are millions of anecdotal pieces of information that are credible on this. And if you look at the data and you believe what people say, and I have no reason to disbelieve what anybody says about this. I mean, there's maybe 10% that are, not all there, but these are, NHI, I mean, like Kirk said, I mean, one thing we could agree on is it's real. But if they come out and they say that that our consensual reality, what we call our fixed reality that we've had on this planet for the last 2,000 years, or as long as history's been around, that all changes. And we are no longer at the top of the food chain. And everything's going to be changing about this. And you're going to be sort of left adrift. And I don't think I haven't seen anybody when they talk about disclosure, particularly when I read the defense authorization bill, there wasn't anything in that about how you control this narrative, how you prepare people for, it could be a mere response, like Kirk said, depending on what's being said, or it could be something much, much more serious. If you have 10 or 15% of the population, 30 some million people decide that this is so shocking to them. This is such, they're almost viewed as an existential threat. Do they just drift away? Did they become doomsday preppers? Did they start worshiping the UAP? I mean, you can think of so many different scenarios that can surround this in the worst case scenario. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but you damn well better be prepared for that. And I can't imagine throughout the last 80 years that the government hasn't thought about this. Of course they've thought about this. They most likely have some kind of a plan in case something comes out, in case the Chinese say something, or the Russians say something, or the French, or somebody says something. So I think this is really, it's fragile ground. I mean, you have to be very, very careful how we approach this, and we have to think about it. And what's the purpose? I mean, what's Soul Foundation going to do? I mean, I would hopefully think that Soul Foundation will be at the forefront in talking about this. And I'll just say one more thing before I shut up. When we started To the Stars, right, the beginning, there was an understanding that there was no way that we would expect the government to come out and discuss disclosure. We sort of knew, I had gone to, levels of the CIA, ODNI, and other government agencies and explained to them that we were going to do this as a company, unclassified, and we were going to take a private look at this. Every single one of these organizations, and I told them, I said, if you have anything you want to say about this, or you tap me on the shoulder later on and say, don't do this or don't do that, I said, I'll go along with that. I said, but if you don't have anything to say, let me know now. And every one of them said, go with God, keep us posted. Okay, fine. So I guess my point of this, when To the Stars came up, we had this understanding that we are going to do this publicly. There's enough information out there, I think. The government doesn't own this damn topic. It has nothing. I mean, what it has is maybe downcraft, and and it has maybe more information than we do. I don't even think they have that much information, to be honest with you. Well, anyway, I won't say how I know that, but it's something I think that it is up to us. And this is what I like so much about Soul Foundation, because you guys are really at the forefront of all of this. Oh, we are at the forefront of all this. And To the Stars is trying its best to get there too, through education. It's just looking at this and taking this and socializing this to the point where people get accustomed to it. don't want the Spielbergian version of this, and I don't want, some of these other, cartoon versions like E.T. and all that kind of stuff. It's much, much more complicated than that. You're changing people's reality. No matter how you look at it, you're changing their reality, their place in the universe. That is a serious, serious thing to consider. So I'll shut up. I got on my high horse. I apologize.
I would like to point out that the UAP Disclosure Act, to its credit, contains a structure for the government to build on to decide how it's going to do disclosure. The review board and the implied authorities, at least, of that review board would provide, a series of experts picked by the president and confirmed by the Senate to provide advice to the president and to Congress about how to structure a disclosure campaign. And so, if the government if the executive branch doesn't have a plan, that was an attempt to provide one. And I think it's a smart thing to do. I think if the executive branch is deterred in part because, oh crap, what are we going to tell them? Well, okay, Congress is trying to give them a framework, frankly, to go figure that out. But it's not a reason to just hide your head in the sand and punt, any longer. Like, this has been going on for a long time, and people do have a right to know, and it's not a way to run the government.
Yeah, I agree, and I have to tell you, though, I was very impressed with the act. I mean, with and how they put it together. I thought it was thorough, very, very thorough. I don't think I could have added anything to it. So I think you're right, Kirk. It's what I would like to see. What I think is really necessary, and I don't know whether this has been done, but I would like to see a public or a private study being done of professionals, the ones like your review board that was discussed in the UAPDA. Let's put them together. Let's make it a public a process, and actually sit down with all these people and just ask them the question. How would you do this? How would you manage this? And make it something public. So somebody knows we're actually thinking about this and we actually come up with it. I mean, Hal Puthoff likes to discuss, when he was in that think tank that put it together, how 50 some people got together and they all said, yeah, disclosure should be, we should absolutely have it. And then after like 2 or 3 days, they all decided against it. It wouldn't be a good thing. I think that was back in 2004. I think we're more than overdue for another one of those.
Yeah, we're at Sol actively doing research. I don't want to talk too much about it until it's firmed up a bit on that would allow us to have some very serious hard data about what Americans at least would do in the event of a disclosure event, where we would know, both broadly and at a granular level, to what extent people are ready for different kinds of narratives and how it would affect their mental health and so on. I also think that you need not just academics and scholars. I think you need intelligence professionals, because they understand how to think, only in terms of the probability of various scenarios being true, different kinds of uncredentialed investigators, investigative journalists in the classic sense, not just podcasters. I think you need people like that to really think about this very holistically. We suffer right now from a polarity in our thinking where there's a sense there's something called nuts and bolts. I don't know too many people who really believe that it's just that, right? But there is a kind of research or investigation that focuses only on technology. And then we've got what I would, as a scholar, say the position which treats all of this as religious experience. the paranormal, and so on. And in between, we've neglected a whole bunch of stuff. And that's obscured our understanding of what the government might know. It may not have tons of data. It may know some hard facts. And I think that, for example, there's a big difference between vehicles that are occupied by beings that are biological or apparently biological, that have interests like ours. They're like us enough or commensurate with us enough that they're not completely alien. They could have ecological and economic interests. They could be politically organized. They would have law. There's a big difference between that and the idea that all the UAP are actually perceptual illusions introduced into people's minds. The whole thing is a kind of theater designed to educate us, or that most of it is actually supernatural in nature. There's a huge difference there. And I think we need to have a very deep public discussion about why people are prone to taking different positions about that based on evidence. And then also to get some clarity from government about what it actually knows about this, or what a small component of it does. To go back to a comment I made before, I think it's very tough to tell the Gang of 8 or the Gang of 12 or whatever size gang or party you want in Congress to be aware of some fundamental facts. It's very tough to tell them this if it turns out that there was something like a sustained contact or communication, because it would be diplomatic in nature then. And did you ever go to Congress and get authorization for anything that a lawyer would look at and say, okay, de facto, you had something like an agreement or a treaty?
Yeah, if there's a treaty, blatantly unconstitutional that it wasn't brought for ratification, right? But listen, this is exactly the point, is what the hell is behind the security door? What does the government know? What has the government done? And I would applaud, Sol's efforts, or any other private or academic institutions getting together to sort of game this out. But I think it's a really tough task, because there's such a wide set of variables here that you'd have to consider plausibly.
I agree, and I think what the government knows. I mean, the government in this program, people read the literature. They read the literature. They know about abduction scenarios. They know about contact scenarios. Books have been written, about the static variables that happen when you have a quote unquote abduction experience, whether it's actually an abduction or, a mental suggestion that it's an abduction. I don't know, but if you look at what we do know, as Kirk said earlier on, this is real. All right, non-human intelligence or some kind of form of intelligence is real. And we know that it has the capabilities, to do things. It can have the capability to make you think a certain way and to do a certain thing. It has the ability to do that anytime it wants to do that. Perhaps they're shape shifting. Maybe there's 6 different species. How the hell do you explain, and this is one of the problems with all of this, how the hell do you explain a reptilian or a mantis-like figure to an 8-year-old? He's going to hear about it when disclosure happens. And if any of you have, kids or grandkids, I wouldn't want to be in that position to try to explain that. And I had somebody who was who knows this topic very, very well and was involved in the government for a long time regarding this topic, say the same thing to me. He said, when we started To the Stars, he came up to me and he said, why do you want to scare 8-year-olds? He says,
Right.
you understand? He kept telling me, do you understand what's behind this? And when Hal took me aside, and I mentioned this before, and I was briefed on some areas while I was at the agency as a contractor, 2 different times, very lengthy briefings, and they weren't so much on UAP, but they were on the attendant of things that are associated with UAP, and mostly psi stuff, and that they were real. And when you have people with very high clearances, sitting you down and explaining this to you, and you already know some of this stuff yourself, but you had that veil there, right? And then all of a sudden, because you didn't really know if it was true, and I think, yeah, it's probably true. I do believe it's true, but I don't really know. And then somebody takes the veil and throws it off. I mean, I'm not a real sophisticated guy, but I will tell you, it shocked the living hell out of me, and I had to take a break, and I was shaking a little bit. And I got home that night after the first briefing, and my wife is, clinical psychologist. She said, you have that 1,000-mile stare in your face, and I had it for a while. It was just a little bit too much, and I still don't like the feeling I have now about this when I think about it or talk about it. So I know I'm being discursive here, and I apologize, but I guess the point is we have to be very, very serious about how we go about this and how about we discuss it. And when people just say things like, "Oh, it'll change humanity for the better," and what have you, well, okay, maybe it will, but I don't want to take that chance.
Well, yeah, I'd hate to take a chance, but at the same time, it's not going to get better with age, and the idea that you're going to keep the people from, in some ignorance is bliss kind of position. I just, in the end, I can't live with that. I mean, myself, I think, no, you got to face up to what's going on. You got to deal with it,
Well, I think that's, I don't disagree with you. As a matter of fact, if somebody said, make up your mind right now, I sort of would side with that the truth is really important. And there's no question about that. We need to know that is a birthright of us. I mean, our humanity. I mean, we should know where we sit in this universe. And all I ask, and I think most people would ask is, okay, give that to me, but give that to me in a more palatable form. Because I think it's not just, we live in a bubble. The people involved in this, generally, I've found, generally tend to be very, very bright people. They inquisitive, and they've been used to it. They've been studying it for a long time, and they can sort of say, yeah, I can deal with this. But we also have to think of the people that are out there that, live their religion every day. They live very simple lives. I don't know what the truth is going to do to them. And we can make comments like, well, there'll be disruption for a little while. Well, yeah, that's okay to say, but I don't know if I want to. I want to disrupt that much. I think it'd be highly disruptive in some cases, not all cases. I think you would fare very well. I think all of us would fare reasonably well on this, but I'm not quite sure of everybody else. That's all.
But I think a lot of those people, Jim, who just live, their regular lives and they go to work every day and they barely have any time to do anything else except to earn a living and raise their kids. I mean, I think that if this issue doesn't affect their lives directly, a lot of them just aren't going to care that much. I mean, they've lived their full lives. They've never been impacted by this. They've never seen anything. And assumedly any announcement would involve a sense of safety for people. They don't want people to be afraid. So don't you think a lot of people might just not be that interested and not care that much? And it's just a small portion of the population that really would engage with it?
Yeah, I think it was an excellent point. I mean, that's what I said earlier. You can have this meh response. I mean, it could be just one deflation. I mean, the president comes out and says this, and everybody goes, "Oh, that's a front page of all the newspapers for 2 weeks," and it goes away, and people go carry on their lives.
Exactly.
That could be exactly it. But it goes back to what Kirk said earlier, and that is exactly how much is going to be said And then what are the corresponding narratives that are going to come out with that? I mean,
they will, or after that, they're going to come out. I mean, the dangerous part is what happens afterwards, I think, when all the questions start getting asked. It's not so much the announcement itself, because assumingly it would be conservative, it would be thought through very carefully. But what about all the questions that we mentioned earlier? That's when it gets dangerous afterwards. But I still think a lot of people won't engage with it.
And it's what happens even 5-10 years later, because
it's a long process.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could get our friend Carl Nell to do more things like this. It would be great to have him in this conversation. I think one thing Carl is particularly lucid about is the need for a very deliberate plan about how you narrate, what you decide that can be said, and then how you deal with the ramifications across all social institutions and fields. Whether it's economic, whether they're economic ramifications, geopolitical, cultural, religious, et cetera. It's a very tall order, but you have to do that, because I think people haven't thought about very simple consequences, like that they may already be taking place as other governments, intelligence services, and militaries look at the activity in the United States. Well, of course, if you were a clever military planner and you had some power, you would say, okay, if the Congress and some presidents and a bunch of cabinet officials and intelligence officials are saying this is real, then no doubt the United States has tried to communicate with these things. Well, we better get on it, and we better do some communicating. And you can imagine not just 36 narratives, but 36 state and non-state, which is to say private sector attempts at communication. And none of us know if that's actually dangerous or not. With respect to NHI, whatever they are, what we sure as hell know is dangerous is the effects that can have on geopolitics. Sure. Just imagine the kind of variable that gets introduced into international competition then. And the idea that some state and non-state, and now in this sense, something like terrorist actors, the danger that gets introduced if they start to believe, well, we could maybe get some kind of advantage by getting some of this technology.
Right. Well, don't forget too, the government doesn't control disclosure. I mean, at all. I mean, the who has the upper hand here, as the president likes to say. Who's holding the cards? NHI is holding the cards. Holding the cards. And are they in charge of disclosure? I mean, they may very well be. We don't even know it. And they've never come down and said hello to Peter. Have they come down to you and said anything at all to you? And no. And they haven't done it to Kirk and to Leslie or to me either. Now, they came to me, which I think they did at least, and in a very unwelcome way. And, don't like it, still don't like it, still consider it a human rights violation. That's why my view is more cautious, I guess. But, I think we need to hear more from NHI, and they seem to be like 2,000 years of this stuff, and they're giving us a little bit more, I think, but we still don't know anything about them. We don't know their plans and intentions. We don't know if they have any ethics or morals. We don't even know if they're interested in us. I mean, Jacques Vallée likes to say there's more of a disinterestedness, and sometimes I think it's more of an insouciance, like they get a kick out of it. If you read John Keel, he'll say it's a big joke. It's like you're being tormented, off and on by these things, and by them introducing themselves sorta, and they lie. The deception involved, some of the things they do with their contactees, telling them certain things, and I'm just tend to be very, very cautious and very, very skeptical about releasing that type of information, because it just takes you out of where you've been and moves you someplace that you don't even know where you're going to be. In other words, maybe we are talking apes,
Well, human narcissism is a good check against this being destabilizing for a lot of people, and also optimism in some cases, but I think human narcissism will get you pretty far in terms of indifference to this. I think we could point to certain politicians in the public eye, and they may not take the issue seriously. You can guess maybe who I'm talking about, because they think anything bigger than them isn't important, and that may get us somewhere. I'd offer that. On the other hand, I do think one of the reasons that very clear news reporting about this, when it is clear, and when the sources are not just credible, but they're coming from the highest ranks of government. I mean, even Kamala Harris commenting on it while vice president. I think that's not getting absorbed because there really is a psychological denial mechanism here. We don't know what it why it's there. We don't know what the exact fear or anxiety or dread would be, but there does seem to be some serious denial about this because, and I can't chalk it up just as a scholar to, some people having a propensity for skepticism. That's a little too simple. But I still want to go back to the scenarios in which there's something that is more akin to our reality or commensurate with our reality on the other end. Many of us are, all four of us are familiar with very, very credible claims coming from people in a position to know, who say they know, that there has been a contact event, a very explicit, very manifest, obvious contact event, nothing that was liminal or elusive, that, something like a landing and an interaction. To me, if that happened, that means most likely there was an interaction with something quite like us that does have political interests, that does have probably has law, probably has ethics, maybe very different from us, in which there's a great asymmetry of power and technology. And I don't know how you narrate that. I mean, while telling the truth. And I don't know how you narrate it the way it's been narrated to us, as if it just happened once. I have a very hard time believing that if that happened once, it didn't happen several times. But the version we've all heard is that it happened once. And what's implausible to me is not that it happened; it's that it would happen one single time, and then the interaction stops. Unless you really had no control of the interaction, you certainly would be attempting to have further interactions, further conversation, further discussion. It would really have to be something so alien, so weird that you felt like you couldn't establish regular or intelligible communication with it, that you wouldn't say, well, we need a diplomatic line of communication and rapport. So I got you guys with that.
I don't know what to say to that. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but I don't know what else to say about it, Peter. But it does make sense, yeah, that if it happened once, it would happen more than once, unless the NHI were in such control that they didn't initiate it again, and we didn't have the opportunity to do it or to interact, or we didn't want to interact. I mean, you're bringing up such a can of worms. It's something so complex that I don't know how to respond.
Well, and again, if it happened once, why think there would only have been one, okay, so we hear reports about one, but what if it's very regular? I mean, this is my fundamental argument, is that we can't say what disclosure is going to bring because we don't know what's on the other side of the security barrier. And there are so many possibilities here. And each one of those possibilities, brings a different impact and a different outcome. So,
yeah.
I don't feel confident myself, maybe others really do, that they know enough about the reality behind the secrecy that enables them to envision, what kind of impact disclosure would have. Now, I mean, I think part of what Jim is arguing is that it doesn't matter. A lot of those variables don't really matter. Just take the fundamentals. Like, well, there's non-human intelligence. There's different varieties of it. They visited here a long time. They have tremendous capabilities, and try explaining that to your 8-year-old, okay, so that's at one level. You can play around with what disclosure would mean, but there's so many other critical specifics that that we won't know until we pierce the veil and face up to it.
Yeah,
and that makes dealing with the prospect of disclosure very difficult.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you both were saying. I mean, in the end, I mean, you look at this, and I know the president likes to talk about the card, who has the cards. Well, clearly, this is an intelligence or intelligences, that is have the technology way beyond our ken. They they clearly have all kinds of technology that make ours look primitive. So, are they from the future? As McMaster's likes to say, Professor McMaster's likes to say, and like Kirk said, there's so many possibilities you don't really know. And this is why, if they come and what if they said something? What if they said, well, look, you know, here's what reality is. Here's what it's all about. And we're all, and they go down to the quantum mechanics level and say we're all just energy forms, and you're here, manifested or incarnated in this physical body for this particular purpose. Um, um, and then they say religion. Well, we sort of introduced that ourselves and sort of got out of hand. And there's really no God per se. That's this, that, and the other thing. I mean, it could be, so disruptive on so many levels. And it's like you'd have to stack, science on top of anthropology, on top of religion, on top of politics, on top of culture in general. It's all interrelated, and it's so complex. That's why I like to call it a wicked problem. I don't think there's any kind of resolution to any of this. I think what you do is you take it individually, what you do know, and then you try to piece it all together. And how are we gonna attack this? How are we going to play this game as human beings? After disclosure or when disclosure eventually comes, and that's going to take some brighter minds than me. So it's. I mean, reality's hard enough, isn't it? I mean, it's just hard enough. And it's, T.S. Eliot, I like to quote him all the time. He wrote a great poem, Bert Norton, and he said, humankind cannot bear too much reality. And I think that's so true. I mean, we can only accept so much. Our bodies and our minds can only accept so much. And then, you sort of dissolve. And so how do we prevent that from happening?
And I think the other factor too, but no matter how many layers you put on it, like you were saying, no matter how authoritative, no matter how scholarly it is, a lot of people aren't even going to believe it.
Yeah.
So the government can put out whatever it wants. I mean, what's going to make them believe it? They're not going to probably are they going to have to offer proof of some sort in order to really make disclosure happen? Or can they just give a bunch of statements and expect people to accept it? Well, they're not going to accept it. A lot of people. Well, and that makes it even messier.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there are some people saying, I don't believe anything he says.
Yeah, why should I believe what the government says? Show me the proof, and maybe they'll be able to show something, but it's not going to be enough.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is I think we should be confident that people under 45 or 40 will accept a lot of it because they already do. And they already say, why don't they just, it is a very common refrain I hear from people who aren't even that young, which is, okay, why don't they just, quit beating around the bush and get to the point? They obviously know something. Why don't they tell us? And we hear much stronger versions of that in the UAP community, which is like, well, okay, if you know something, why don't you come out and say it instead of having a bunch of your Confederates dribble it out for you, right? And so I do think that there's a certain tolerance for reality there. I do think, to your point, Leslie, that you need a very, very clear narrative. and you need it to be based on presentable public evidence of a kind that would be accepted by a wide variety of people. Some of it has to be something scientists can put their hands on. Some of it has to be something that would pass the smell test of a newspaper editor or an investigative journalist and would be investigatable. And some of it would have to be something that people in media would go, okay, just general, broadcast or alternative media, where the statements are very clear as official statements, not vague statements, not off the cuff stuff, but official press conference, State of the Union, preceded by cabinet officials talking, and but it would need to present some things that are would be very resistant to doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a necessity, I would think.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a good point.
Even so, people won't accept it, but the more of that you have, the better, obviously.
Okay, so we've gone for a long time, so let's close this down. I would like to ask each of you what you see over the next 2 to 3 years in the way of disclosure. I know it's an unfair question. It's a question nobody wants to ask. This isn't prophecy. This is not, this is not predicting the stock market in a professional way. But you all are extremely experienced professionals on this. Where do you see this going in the next 2 to 3 years? Leslie.
Well, I mean, and again, what do I know? But I feel that we will continue on the path that we're on now, that things will continue to come out, that things will continue to happen, that we might have more hearings, better legislation, some documents and videos released, as we discussed earlier. And I just think the gradual process that we're involved with now is going to continue. And whether it's going to reach some kind of endpoint or some kind of line that gets crossed in which it becomes full disclosure, if we can even define what that is, I don't know. But I think it's going to take a while, and I expect to see things continue to evolve and more members of Congress to get involved. I mean, I basically have a positive orientation towards the future. So all I can imagine is we continue down the path we're already on, and it just gets we get more accomplished and more people involved, and keep taking steps forward and see how long it takes. But I'm very positive about what's going to happen in the future. And even though we've discussed so many possible problems with disclosure, I feel that the gradual approach is really the best one, partly because of all those problems. And, to acclimate the society as best we can through various means. I mean, Jim was talking about culture and movies, and, there's all kinds of ways to kind of bring people into the fold. But I basically think we're just going to keep going. The train has left the station and it's not going to stop. And we'll see where it ends up in 3 years.
Yeah, I actually total agreement with Leslie on this. I even though I come off sometimes as a Jimmy Downer, I'm very optimistic. And I do think that you're going to see more research coming out from scientists, which I think is going to be really, really helpful. More commentary from scholars, which I think is going to be helpful. And I think it'll be socialized a little bit more. And I think some of the weirder aspects will come out too and will be open for discussion. I'm not quite sure about Congress and the executive branch. I mean, they have to figure out something, on what they're going to do here. And whoever's running the program, well, we know who it is, but I'm not going to say, but they're running the program. They're going to have to come to some kind of understanding that this is not going away. It just isn't. It's not ever going away, and it's just going to get more and more. I mean, when you have people like Spielberg, making another movie on disclosure, I mean, it just isn't going to go away. I'll leave it at that.
Right.
Well, Peter, when you said, I know nobody likes to ask the question. No, asking the question is easy. Answering the question is
Yeah,
what
right.
I don't like to have to do. But I guess I would say that it's really important when you're blocked. The government resists opening, opening their closet of knowledge. To stress what Jim referred to as, I think, as private efforts, and we do see a lot more of those forming up and getting going. And the happy aspect of that is that there are the technologies for detecting and tracking and characterizing this phenomena, as it appears to us at least, is much more in the grasp of citizen scientists and private groups, right? And so that is also a factor that I think is sort of taking hold, and is going to, I hope, be permanent and will grow. And this will put pressure on the government. You actually have some state governments now weighing in. I mean, we've seen legislation, I guess, in New Jersey and in Connecticut. That's an interesting thing. Like, they see stalemate at the federal level and on an important issue, and the states start thinking, well, is there a role for us? And of course, these states are experiencing these what do we always call them, flaps of UAP flooding over important areas in their states. So that's going on. People have talked about what Hollywood is paying attention, and is the pace there of documentaries and science fiction that nonetheless contains a lot of what is discussed in the UAP community. So that's happening at the same time. We can hope that we will somehow be blessed with some responsible whistleblowers that come forward. Hopefully, that would be aided by some legislation protecting them. But there's also talk about creating private restitution funds, compensation funds, that get donors to put up some money to sort of support people who come forward. There's obvious practical difficulties in making that workable, but that's a factor that could contribute to the dam breaking, as it were. And there is in the popular mind, there are interesting things. Yeah, some of you all might have known or seen Avi Loeb. I can't remember how he executed this, but there was a survey taken recently, and people were asked, what do you personally think the odds are, or the chances are, that there is non-human intelligent life visiting here, or something like that? And they said, personally, I think it's like, I'd put it at 75%. I mean, that's sort of the average across the survey respondents. And then the question was, well, what do you think your fellow man thinks? And it was starkly different. Most people think that it's real, but they think that other people think that it's bullshit, right?
It's funny.
And that score, by the way, was like 20%.
Wow.
So we're walking around amongst our fellow citizens, and most of these people seem to think, yeah, it's real, it's happening, but they don't want to talk about it because they think that people will think they're crazy, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that political leaders need to take this dynamic into account and realize that the risk of taking this seriously in a public way is not what they would have thought it was. And I've seen this myself. Leslie, I don't know if you said it was so hard being at a cocktail party, and you say you're working on UFO stories, and they immediately have to go refill their drink, right?
But not anymore. That was before 2017. Well, now I feel proud to say what I did.
Yeah. And at first, even a few years ago, a lot of my friends would just laugh at me about it, but they don't anymore.
No, they don't. It's really changed.
So, look, there's, I think that's a hopeful sign that that people are getting their minds accustomed to thinking about this reality.
I think there's one more factor that we got to throw into the pot, though, in terms of the next 2 or 3 years or even beyond, is whether the NHI itself, whether something dramatic could happen involving NHI, involving some dramatic kind of event that is completely beyond our control and could happen, where something happens that makes it irrefutable that this is real and affects everyone on the planet. So, there's that wild card aspect of something happening orchestrated by whatever the phenomenon is, or even randomly just happening, or it could even be a crash or something like that, which today is not going to be able to escape scrutiny with everyone out there with the cell phones, as it could have 20, 30, 40 years ago. So we don't know what might happen on that level either in the next few years.
Yeah.
What do the Chinese say? May we live in interesting times. Right.
We sure do. It sure makes it interesting.
Right.
Well, it's not, Jim, it's not only NHI that gets a vote, as I think you guys are saying, is other countries too. I mean, suppose China decides, screw this, we're going to start talking about this, or the Russians. So,
I mean, the question is, would they give us a warning if they were going to do that?
Or are we already basically liaising with them on this particular topic?
Well, that's another question, right? Do you have any insight into that, Jim?
No, I'll just say no.
You'll just say no. Okay.
No. We know Five Eyes is involved. I mean, and to a certain extent.
Right. But that doesn't involve, but we're talking to, anyway. It's a really interesting question to contemplate the roles of these other countries in all of this in terms of relationship to us, or if there isn't one, how they would go about it if they were going to go about it.
Think back to Reagan's speech about what would bring the world together and all that, and the conversations with Gorbachev. You also have the case. Eric Davis has reported that he was asked by an intelligence agency to come in and review some information that came from the former Soviet Union about a crash there. In fact, before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And this information was shared with the United States government in the 2000s. And I don't think anything, obviously nothing came of it that we are aware of, but there was this sharing of information about a crash, and Eric experienced that. I mean, so he's a firsthand source of having seen that information that was shared by some people from Russia with us.
It's interesting.
So. There's not zero evidence supporting the idea that we have maybe been in touch with other powers here on Earth about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you to all of you, and to Jim's point about pray you do not live in interesting times. Well, thank you, Kirk, Leslie, and Jim, for keeping these interesting times. I think I'd put it that way. I think all three of you have contributed to that in vital and really visible ways. And thanks for the conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you,
A lot
Peter.
of fun. Thank you, Peter. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks. It's nice seeing all of you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here.